The excavation at Tel Moza is one of the most talked about excavations in Israel today. And instead of telling you about it myself, I thought the best way to learn about Tel Moza is to get one of the directors of the Tel Moza excavation to come and actually talk to you about the excavation herself. So today we're going to be talking with Shua Kisilevitz about the Tel Moza excavation and everything you want to know about the Tel Moza excavation and all of the new discoveries you're going to learn about in today's video. So come on, let's go dig. Hey, I'm Dr. Bob Cargill, the excavator, and on behalf of Bible and Archaeology, I am thrilled to welcome Shua Kisilevitz, the director of the Tel Moza excavation in Israel. Shua, thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Tell us about this excavation that everybody seems to be talking about. It's an incredibly significant excavation. What is Tel Moza? Where is it? And how did you get involved with this excavation?
Well, it's a loaded question because I could spend a week talking about the site, I've become very engrossed in it. If you could see out my window, you'd see that I'm actually looking towards the site. This is completely accidental. I lived here before I started excavating, but I do live right across the street from the site. So Tel Moza is really a fantastic site. It's a site that's been excavated since the early 90s, periodically by mostly salvage excavations by the Israel Antiquities Authority. And the excavations revealed an incredible Iron Age site. So it has different periods. It has earlier periods and later periods, but really the Iron Age is the most dominant period. It has been identified as biblical Moza, which is mentioned in connection to the tribe of Benjamin as one of the settlements in the area of the tribe of Benjamin. And I think the most amazing thing, so for me, and this ties in, the uniqueness of the site ties in with my part in excavations. So I joined the excavations as an Israel Antiquities Authority worker, as an archaeologist in 2012. And when I came in, the excavation was supposed to be just a small excavation to kind of expand areas that were already excavated previously, because there was a bridge that was going to be built above. And the people who were running the excavation were actually prehistorians because most of what they were digging was right above bedrock, and it was the Neolithic period. And I came in, it was completely coincidental. I had just come back from a different excavation, and I was living so close. So I was put into the excavation, and these amazing finds of cultic artifacts had just been found. I think it happened about 3 days before I joined.
Really?
So it was really just, I think it was serendipitous that I just happened to join this excavation at the right time. And I do deal with the Iron Age. I've always found it interesting. I started out working at Chatzor, which is, a biblical site, Bronze Age and Iron Age. Sure. And so coming in to Moza, we had these wonderful artifacts, this cultic assemblage, and it wasn't clear where they were from, what the context is, what are we talking about? There's something cultic here. It's very early in the Iron Age, and we've never seen anything like it. And what do we do? So we asked for permission to expand the area we were excavating, because the salvage excavation has very specific limitations, both in time and in space. So we asked for some days, and we got 7 days to expand a little bit and find the context. And, in archaeology, you kind of peel back the layers, and we peeled back until we got to the original phase of this big building that was sitting there, which we now got to see, which was a temple. And it was amazing. I mean, I remember this discovery, and really we found, we saw this building, very nice big building, and we were uncovering this element that was kind of square. And at some point we were standing in front of it, and Anna, who was one of the directors of the dig, and I were looking, and we said, it's right across from the entrance. It's right on this axis with the entrance. It's very reminiscent of the temples at Chatzor, and I said, okay, I come from Chatzor, I need to stop thinking about it. But that's when we started realizing that we have cultic assemblage, and we have this really unbelievable element right across from the entrance, which ended up being the altar. And as we continued excavating, and it just, it all came out. And I say it's almost like a checklist of what a temple has to have, and Moza has it all.
So you actually found a structure, and the structure, to be clear, was kind of a main room, a big square rectangular room, and then a smaller room attached to it in the rear, kind of like a Holy of Holies.
Yes. So I should say, and this is amazing because I think this also says a lot about the way excavations develop. The building itself was first excavated and exposed, or partially exposed, in 1993 by Tzvi Greenhut and Alon de Groot. And they realized this was a monumental building, a public building, and they also noted that it may have had some cultic function. But it's only after we peeled back all of the later phases, all of these different walls that kind of obscured the original building, that we could see it as what it was. And what it is the common, very abundant plan of monumental temples in the ancient Near East. So it begins in the late 4th millennia BCE in the north, and then it comes down to our region, to the Levant, the southern Levant, in the 3rd millennium BCE. So it's been around for a long time, and gated room, a long room, if you like,
sure.
Which means that the entrance is in the short wall. In this case, in our case, which is most cases, by the way, of temples of this period, the entrance is in the eastern wall. So you walk in through the eastern wall, and then it's a long room. We now know, based on the last season, we now finally have the western wall. We find, our western wall and the edge of the temple, the end of the temple. So we now know that the temple is 24 meters long. It's quite a large building. Yeah. And at the back of this temple, of this long room, there would have been the Holy of Holies, which is where the representation of deity would be. What we also have in Moza is this additional room, as you pointed out, this room that extends to the north of the main hall. And it's a very interesting room because there are temples. It seems like there's a sub type of this temple, which is called the North Syrian temple or the In-Antis temples. Right. We know them in different places, but there's a subtype that has rooms, either one room or a few rooms or a series of rooms that kind of enclose the building, and surround it. And two other examples are the temple at Ein Dara, which is northern Syria, and the temple in Jerusalem, which also has these rooms around. So Moza seems to fall into this subtype. Right now, we only have the one room. And I can tell you that one of the really interesting things that we discovered this season, we finally exposed, as I said, the western wall. It includes the western wall of this room to the north. And it turns out that there is a niche in the western wall of this room, which I have not seen in any other temple, and I've run this by people who are also who deal with this period and with cult, Talai Onan and Amichai Mazar and Amnon Bento, and no one has seen anything like this. And having a niche is definitely an indication of placing something of importance, either a representation of a deity, it could be a standing stone, it could be some kind of a statue, or some kind of a cultic artifact. Right. And it would be something that would be probably more of a permanent furniture in the temple rather than something, offerings that people would bring in and would keep on switching out, because they've actually allocated, they literally built in a niche in which to place it. And so that, of course, begs the question of, is this for the storing of the representation of the deity? And I keep on saying representation because we don't know what the representation was. As I said, it could be a standing stone, it could be a statue, we don't know. Right. So it could be a way of storing it every now and then. It could be that this is a junior deity in the temple that's being worshipped, and that is the room of that junior deity. And it makes it very, very interesting, of course, and we'll have to keep on studying this.
Do you think people confuse their knowledge of the Second Temple, for which we have a lot of information, with knowledge about the First Temple, for which we don't have a lot of information, especially when talking about Tel Moza? I seem to remember 2 Kings 18:4 and Hezekiah kind of bragging about taking away all these other elements of worship, places to worship, and Josiah doing the same thing, right? In 2 Kings 23, it's pretty clear in the Bible that there is not supposed to be any other place, any other worship, right? They're kind of bragging about it. And yet, apparently, the evidence says there was another fully operational temple not too many miles just outside of Jerusalem. So How are you guys reconciling that?
I think it's wonderful. I can tell you that I was raised secular Jew in Israel, and I thought that I was secular. I mean, we celebrated the holidays and Friday night, but otherwise nothing. And I did not realize that we do have this biblical paradigm that is just kind of innate, and at least in this country, in the way that you study the Bible. And it's not, what we see is not what the biblical texts are telling us. It's what we think that they should be telling us. Or if I'm a little blunt about it, it is what people in later periods after the biblical text was written, and mostly during the Middle Ages, decided that they think the Bible is telling us. So if you kind of put that away, and I spent years shedding all of this, these preconceptions I wasn't even aware that I had, in order to be able to see it. And I'm not a biblical scholar, and I have to be upfront about that. I'm not a biblical scholar, but of course I have studied, biblical scholarship, so I can understand where it is that we fit in. And when you read the biblical text, and yes, you are right, there are these two very clear descriptions of cultic reforms that are done in the late 8th century BCE by Hezekiah, and then late 7th century BCE by Josiah. And what these reforms are talking about, they describe, not so much Hezekiah. It's not very detailed, and obviously it didn't work, because if it did work, there would be no need for, a century later for Josiah to do another reform.
Right.
And Josiah's reform, though, that's very detailed. I mean, it's really expansive. Right. When you look at the text, it's just like, so much is going on there. But in both cases, they very clearly talk about, they actually note that what the reform is reforming is places of worship throughout the land, places of worship that were built by the kings of Judah and maintained by the kings of Judah and by the priests that they had set at the temples, that there were several or many different deities that were being worshipped, including in the temple in Jerusalem.
Right.
The temple in Jerusalem, where we talk about Baal, and we talk about Asherah, and we talk about the different heavenly deities. So definitely there is this description. There is even a description of women who are sitting in the temple in Jerusalem and creating garments for Asherah, for the Asherah. So it is very obvious that this is what's going on. So if we look at this, we're looking at one, it's a Kodak moment. It's a moment in time. And what the reforms are telling us is, this is what has happened until now. We are going to change it. To us now, this is not acceptable. This is not legitimate. So we're going to change it. So at the very earliest, in the late 8th century BCE, this is when a king of Judah decides, if we believe that these reforms took place, decides that now you cannot worship anywhere you want. You have to worship only in Jerusalem, in the temple in Jerusalem, and you cannot worship any god you want. There is only one God. Now, that is the earliest you could go. And what he's actually saying is that up until then, you did worship in lots of places, and you did worship lots of gods.
Right.
Now, again, this obviously did not work, because a century later, there is a need to do this, and in a much more extensive way.
Right.
Which means that up until the late 7th century BCE, at the earliest, we are talking about, and this is what the Bible is saying. So if we go back and we read the text, and we now try to not think about what we think is the right thing, what the way they should have been acting, but actually reading what they're telling us that they actually did, the way they actually communicated with the gods, because they're talking about many gods. They are saying that at the very earliest, it is in the late 7th century that there is a massive reform. So at best, it is the last 40 years of the kingdom of Judah, after the kingdom of Israel no longer even exists.
Right.
At best, according to the Bible, this is not archaeology. According to the biblical text, at best, it is only in the last 40 years that there is one God being worshipped in one place in Jerusalem. So actually, the biblical texts do a very good job of telling us what we should expect if we try to look at it from the perspective of what is written and not what we think should be written. I will also say that that's the biblical description. It is also important to note, and this is biblical scholarship, and there is no doubt, everybody agrees that, this Deuteronomistic viewpoint, that is of one God in, one dynasty of the Davidic dynasty, and Jerusalem as the only place that, in which worship can take place, is a very late concept. Again, at the very best, time of Josiah, but most people, most scholars think this is post-exilic. And so again, this is just the biblical aspect. But if you look at the archaeological aspect, it is true we do not have a lot. We do have cultic artifacts. They have been found throughout the region. And there was the temple in Arad, which again, this is a temple sitting, in this fort, and it's serving the garrison because they need to be able to worship somewhere. But if you look at there are these, we haven't found another temple, but we did find different kinds of, or I'd say, evidence. So for instance, if I go for textual evidence, the Mesha stela from the 9th century BCE depicts the king of Moab, Mesha, who is boasting about his conquests, as often rulers do, and writing this on this wonderful stela, right? And he talks about, he's literally says, I went to Nevo, to the Israelite town of Nevo, and I conquered the city, and I took from there the vessels of Yahweh. He actually says the name. Now, what is the vessels of Yahweh? These are the cultic artifacts from the temple of Yahweh in Nevo, right? So I took it from there and I brought it to my town, and I put it in the temple of my God, which is Chemosh. So clearly there was a temple for Yahweh, an Israelite temple in the 9th century BCE in Nevo. We know that there were temples in Lachish, for instance. We have the remains that cultic remains, and there's a debate about whether there's the actual structure was found or not. But the fact that there was a temple based on the cultic remains is undoubted. And when you look at the Sennacherib's reliefs in his palace in Nineveh, and he describes, you see there the whole depiction of the conquest of Lachish in the late 8th century. And there's a procession of the soldiers who are taking the loot from Lachish and bringing it towards the king, the Assyrian king. And this is very often the case, and you see it even in the same palace in a different room. You have this procession, and usually what they're carrying are the statues of the gods, because taking the statues of the gods from the temple of the city that you just conquered is the ultimate way of defeating a city. So you take it and you put it in your temple, and you're kind of bring those gods to your temple. And there are not statues, but they are carrying cultic artifacts. These are actually tower stands that have these beautiful kind of like the tree-like stump with a nice pendant petal kind of leaves around, a nice bowl on top, which is by far the most prevalent cultic artifact that we found throughout, the period everywhere, not only in Judah, in Israel, in Phoenicia, in Philistia, in Transjordan, everywhere. This is the vessel. And by the way, not surprisingly, also in the temple in Arad, it is the only cultic artifact. And also in the temple at Moza, where it is the only actual furniture that is semi-permanent furniture of the temple, which is not an offering that was brought. So we see that there were temples everywhere.
This is fascinating. This is truly fascinating. So, the next question is, this temple in Tel Moza, was the Hebrew God worshipped there? Was Yahweh worshipped in this temple, or were other deities worshipped there as well? Because we know that even in the Jerusalem temple, other deities were worshipped there alongside of Yahweh. This wasn't supposed to happen, right? The prophets were railing against this. Is Yahweh being worshipped at Tel Moza, or do we think it's some other deity or deities?
So, to be completely honest, we don't know who was worshipped at the temple at Moza, because we've not yet found the Holy of Holies, and we don't have a statue or a standing stone from this temple. I will get to a different one we do now have.
Yeah.
And unless we find a text, which is very unusual during this period, unfortunately, this is, people of the 10th and 9th century BC did not like to leave writing behind. So unless we find one saying, this, Baal or Yahweh was worshipped here, we won't know for certain. But what we can do is we can look at the context, and we can look at what the biblical texts tell us, and we can look at what we know from the ancient Near East during this period. And by the way, also the temple in Jerusalem, based on the text, because we know one of the problems with the temple in Jerusalem is it is a virtual temple. It doesn't exist archaeologically. It exists only in the text and only in the biblical text.
That's right.
Which, by the way, in itself is an issue that surprises me that nobody has debated this issue or has raised this issue, because Assyrians and Babylonians loved to talk about the temples and the gods that they conquered. So how come nobody is mentioning this temple in Jerusalem? So we know it existed. Nobody's debating its existence, but why is it not mentioned anywhere? So, so we do have this temple now we look at in Moza, and I say this is a test case, a good way of understanding what was being done in the temple in Jerusalem. So the biblical texts are telling us that there are different gods being worshipped in the temple in Jerusalem. No reason not to think, this is not happening in Moza. But most importantly, the question is, when did Yahweh become the main deity? And when did Yahweh even enter, the region? Mm-hmm. So when we look at, there are different ways of looking at this, and there have been different studies done. So the basic way of knowing when a deity becomes a main deity is looking at the theophoric component of names. So the component that has the name of the deity in it. Mm-hmm. And so the Yahweh component does not come in before the 9th century, and we simply don't see it. What we do see before the 9th century is the component of El. Mm-hmm. El, who is the head of the Canaanite pantheon, right? Mm-hmm. He's the main god. And so it is even in the name of the nation, Israel, right. And all of the first names, Yechezkel, right? Ezekiel, all of this right. El in the end, Daniel, all of these are telling us that the main deity in the beginning was El. So it is now commonly accepted that this, Yahweh did not even enter the region before the 9th century. So he entered somewhere in the 9th century. Here we know in the Mishah Stela already in the 9th century, there is a temple for Yahweh. But it does not mean that he was the only God. It does not even mean he was the main God. So this is a question that, again, right now we can't settle. This is what I would say about Moza. The temple at Moza was constructed in the early 9th century BC. I believe that when it was constructed, there were different gods that were being worshipped. And I'm assuming that the main god would have been either El or Baal, because those were the main gods of this region. Mm-hmm. At some point, and the big question is when, either, in the late 9th century or maybe even in the 8th century, I am sure that what happened is that Yahweh became one of the gods and then became the main god, because this is what we see happening throughout the region. Mm-hmm. He is not a sole god. He is not the only god. And again, even by the biblical text, he is not that sole God until the very end of the period. Again, at best in the late 7th century. So this is a long way of saying that in the beginning, I believe, and again, this is theoretical, but it is based on what we know, and it is based on the biblical text and the ancient Near East, that in the beginning there were several deities worshipped at Moza, and as I said, I think probably the main one would have been either El or Baal, and maybe in the late 9th century or going into the 8th century BCE, and it is impossible for us to know exactly when right now, Yahweh becomes the main deity. And one of the big questions is, does the temple in Moza continue on after the reforms of Josiah? It does continue. It seems like it continues after Hezekiah, but does it continue until the end of the period? And this is something we're going to have to figure out as we continue excavating.
Wonderful. So your future plans for the site, you plan on continuing the excavation there. Are you going to continue to work on the site? The site is no longer a salvage, right? It's an ongoing excavation.
Right. This is so. When we excavated the last salvage excavations were in 2012 and 2013, and this is when we identified the building as a temple. And I started working on it, and I'd written my MA thesis about this, and it was it was heartbreaking because we did not finish exposing the excavation, the temple. We simply had to leave. I mean, the salvage excavation was done. We had done what we needed to do, and the site was actually covered up by literally tons of sand. And then construction started on the site, and they started building the road, which is on a bridge. And I could see this every day when I left my house. I could see this being built, and I can see these big chunks of concrete just sitting on the site. And I was thinking to myself, it's going to be, nothing left of the site. By the time we get back there, it will be crumbs. And in 2018, finally, the bridge had been constructed, and it was all done. And the IA started removing the backfill, and I was supervising this. And lo and behold, I mean, it was, call it divine intervention, call it whatever you like. It was wonderfully preserved. I mean, it really was wonderfully preserved. So we opened it up, and by now, this is not a salvage excavation. The road had been built. And so I had already started my PhD in Tel Aviv, at Tel Aviv University. Mm-hmm. So I went to Oded and I said, Oded, let's, we now have this wonderful opportunity the site is open, it's exposed, there's no more need for a salvage excavation. Let's go and excavate. Let's submit a request for a permit to excavate. And this will be now the first non-salvage excavation at the site. And we can finally expose the temple, in its full. And really see and answer all these questions. There were so many questions that I was left with when I was working on the material, because, we stopped in different places. We just stopped short. And so we did. We got the permit in 2019. We had a very small season, 2 weeks with just a few people. A wonderful group from Charles University in Prague came and joined us, and some students from Tel Aviv University. It was just 2 weeks of just checking. But then we put together the project, and yes, it's really garnered a lot of attention. And we now have Charles University and Osnabrück University, which is in Germany, as our partners. And we managed 2020, and unfortunately, COVID defeated us, and there was we literally canceled the excavation 3 weeks before it was supposed to happen. Right. But we came back with a bang in 2021, and August, we had a wonderful season, and lots of local volunteers as well. And it's unbelievable. I told her that this is the site that doesn't stop giving. So I can give you a couple of spoilers now for.
Yeah, please. What can we expect? What are you? Give us the things that we should expect. What are the spoilers? Yeah.
Yeah. So it is pretty amazing because we have these phases, and I should point out that the temple existed for centuries. We don't know when it stopped functioning as a temple, but we know that it was centuries, and we can see these changes in the courtyard. This is where all of the cultic rituals took place. This is where they sacrificed animals, and we have the altar, and we have the pit in which they threw the remains of the animals and the ash and the bones. So we can really recreate these, the rituals and the different and the traditions. And so one of the things we see is that they keep on changing the courtyard. And this makes sense, because if you keep on using, an area, and you're constantly coming in and you're bringing offerings, and you're sacrificing, and, fire, etc., then every few decades, I guess, at the least, you have to renew, you have to build new, floors and new elements, and, a new altar, etc. And this is what they do. And so we see, and so the courtyard keeps on, the floor elevation keeps on rising and rising, and we have new elements being built. So really, for we can see the change in the way cult is being practiced, and I think that there will be something to be said. And this is very preliminary right now, but this is part of my dissertation. I will, hopefully in a few months I'll be able to kind of put it out there. Really, but I think we can see a change in religious ideology through this temple, really throughout the period. So it's really, really exciting. And one of the amazing things that we're doing now is one of our newest team members, Roy Albag. He's an architect turned archaeologist. So he's still an architect, and he has a firm, and he works in that, but he's gotten, in the last few years, he's come into the archaeology field, mm-hmm. and he really loves it. And what he has brought in is something that has started to take root in archaeology, which is using 3D modeling, and even 4D, so virtual.
That's how I know him from.
Really, Roy Albag. Yeah, he does. I think he's the person in Israel. I mean, he does, everything that's been done has been done by him, and so he is now full time, not only part of the Moza team, but he's actually doing his PhD now, a joint PhD by Tel Aviv University and Osnabrück University, our German partners, and so his whole project and his dissertation is the reconstruction of the temple at Moza, and indeed the site, actually. So we're working together on this. And he's going to reconstruct the temple throughout the different periods. Oh, wow. And he's going to create a virtual reconstruction so that any person who's sitting at home right now and watching this, right, will be able to, when this is done, without having to get out of you're getting up from the couch or leaving the comfort of your house, or even leaving, the continent you're on. You don't need to come to the site anymore and see it, because you'll be able to, use your device or put on special goggles, and you'll be able to actually walk through the temple and see changes throughout time. And, this is, I think it's amazing on so many levels, not only, in bringing to life, ancient people. And this is what we love in archaeology, right? We don't see stones and rubble when we look at remains. What we see is the fact that somebody built this and the investment in time and where they tried to do something and prevent something from, toppling over, but it didn't work. And that's the best part of it, is when you realize what they went through. And so this way, anyone who comes to see the site, we will not reconstruct the site, which I think is very important. You'll be able to see the finds the way they were preserved and realize, the extent of preservation or not. But then you'll be able to actually go into this, be it an app or some kind of program, and you'll actually be able to see the temple come alive. And probably, and this way, and I have discussed this, is probably see more than one option, because we may not agree, he and I may not agree. So this is, a lot of this is going to be theory. So we want to give different options, and people can see, the different options of what the temple looked like and what it was like to walk through it.
Sure. That makes me very happy, because my dissertation back in 2008 was a digital reconstruction of Qumran, which was very, with the technology that we had at the time, but even then it was controversial. It was debated because there were so many different theories about Qumran, about what it was. And so I tried to reconstruct all of those different things and then test them all against one another and give people a view of what all these different things would look like. And again, the technology is so much more advanced now. I've kind of moved away from the modeling to do this now, but I'm so excited to see where the modeling has gone now, to see it come back around, and I'm so excited that he's on your team now, and can't wait to see what he produces. This is what I really appreciate the Tel Moza dig is you guys are just you guys have a temple, and you have a temple that was functional during the time that the Jerusalem temple was operational, and yet I think that you're going about it in an incredibly professional, in an incredibly scientific way, and you're not going straight for the headlines. You're not going straight for the sensational, ticket sales and things. You're actually underselling it, right? You're going for the scientific, you're publishing in all the peer review, you're doing those things, and then you're doing a little bit of popular stuff to explain to the people why you're going so slow, and that, I think, actually makes it sound all the more interesting than trying to oversell it, and then people going, yeah, no, that's not what you've got. And then everybody trying to bring it back down. I think that you guys are taking the right approach, and it's an incredibly professional dig. Of course, it's Tel Aviv University, but you guys are such a scientific approach, and the multidisciplinarity, the fact that you're bringing in architects and people from other different disciplines to work on the dig together. It just sounds like you've got a fascinating excavation there. I cannot wait to see some of the objects that you're going to discover. Now, you've got figurines there, right? You've got some actual objects that you've discovered?
Yes, so we do have them, and right now we have artifacts mainly from the first phase of the temple, and these were deposited, as a way. It's almost like the Gniza of today. So this is how you basically, if you can't take sacred artifacts outside of the temple or outside of the complex, the cultic complex. So they have to be deposited in the cultic complex, and the place to do it is not the temple, which is the house of the god. Right. You will not, desecrate the house of the god by, cutting in and creating a pit. So you do it in the courtyard, and this is what we have. Is we basically have, this is actually, they deposited on the floor and then raised the floor and created a new floor above it. I just think that there is no way that this temple prevailed for centuries and only had one period in which they deposited artifacts. I think we're simply not finding them, and there is quite a large part of the courtyard we have not yet excavated. So this is very much the point you were making before. It is very tempting, and this is true anywhere. It is very tempting to just go for, the jugular. If you see something, you're coming in and you see something, you've excavated something, you just want to get down to that elevation everywhere and see what's going on. But we said, no, we now have an opportunity. This is not a salvage excavation. We can decide where we excavate and at what pace. And so what we decided is we're going to go down stratigraphically, and we're going to do it very, very carefully and very slowly. And I think, you're right on the money in saying that we are trying very hard not to be popular. It is very easy. And I always joked, it took us a while to find funding for the dig. And I said, we could easily have come out with some headlines and we would have had millions, I think. I mean, really, this is there's so many different organizations who want to give money to something like this. And I said, this is not what we want them. We want to make sure it's going in the right direction. And we have to keep on, pressing the brakes because we have to be the responsible adults. The other thing is that because the site had been excavated by different expeditions or different teams during the different seasons of salvage excavations, and each has gone down to, a different elevation within the same area, within the same courtyard. You excavated a meter down here, but then next to it, you only excavate 20 centimeters. So we now have only a certain amount left to excavate. We have to be very careful about the way we do it because we have to make sure we're getting as much information as we can and that we're being responsible about it. So we have a nice section that shows lots of different layers in the courtyard, which we're not touching right now. And we keep on bringing experts in, scientists, people who do sciences, to consult with them about what is the best way of sampling this. How can we do this? How can we preserve as much as we can? Because we don't want to lose anything. I admit that I'm, in a way, I know that this is going to be scrutinized because right now, this is the only monumental temple. And so everybody's going to be looking at what we do. And so I want to make sure we're really being, again, you always make mistakes and there are always going to be issues, but that we are as responsible as we can. But mostly I have to say, we're so excited. And this last season has really given us this wonderful push. And something I want to mention that we found it was already in 2012 that I had this inkling, this idea that there is an earlier temple underneath the big monumental temple.
Really?
And yeah, and in 2019, when we excavated in just a little probe, we realized that is true, that there is an earlier temple, which seems to be Iron 2A, tentatively dated to the 10th century BCE. So this is an earlier temple in the period, which puts it maybe even earlier than the temple in Jerusalem. We don't know because we don't know exactly when the temple in Jerusalem was built and exactly when this earlier temple was built. Again, we have very little of it right now. We have to continue expanding and find it. So there were all these little, indications of the temple. And we finally, post 2019, we realized, yes, there is an earlier temple. And then this season, we found this really surprising find. And this was the big one. And this actually happened before the season even started. We were just cleaning up an area that had already been excavated. It was exposed in 1993, and then it got, wash covered it. And then I exposed it again together with Anna in 2013. And then it was covered and the bridge was built. And now I exposed it again, just before our season now, because we said, okay, we're exposing everything that was excavated and leaving it, open so we can just keep on going down. And suddenly I saw this, this stone inside of the wall of the temple, just a stone that was, in the core of the temple wall. And I look at it and I said, this looks an awful lot like legs to me. And it immediately, again, I deal with iconography, with visual imagery of the ancient Near East. And so immediately I said, this looks like, stela or statues that you see in the temples during this period in northern Syria. And so I said, okay, we're going to be very quiet. I didn't say anything to anyone. And I waited, the next day, Odette came in and said, Odette, I have a little gift for you, a little surprise, and, called him over. And, it's one of these things I say that from the moment you see it, you can't unsee it. We did not see, they didn't see it in 93. I did not see it in 2013. And by the way, I went back and I looked at photos and it's in the background in the photos. It was just not as clean as we got it this time. So we didn't notice it. But, I was standing in front of it, 2013, and I didn't notice. And now we pulled it out, and we've shown it to different people. And Talal Nan, who's the priestess of iconography of the ancient Near East in Israel, and she was also my advisor in my MA. She actually inspected it, and we're being very careful. Again, we have to be very careful with this. It seems like it is man-made. It does seem like it is legs of some figure, anthropomorphic figure. It could be a deity. It could be a ruler. What is clear is that if it is man-made, then this is one of these artifacts that we know so well exactly from this period, 10th and 9th century BC, in temples. This is a very clear indication of religious imagery. And the amazing thing is that it has never been found in this region before. We've never found anything like this. So it becomes really unique. And this is how, every little stone, this is what started the Moza syndrome, Oded called it, where now we try to turn every rock around just so we can see if there's anything on it. So there's still a lot to find at the temple.
That's fascinating. This is absolutely fascinating. I thank you so much for sharing all of this. Is this an excavation where people can volunteer to come join you? And if they want to do that, how would they do that?
Absolutely. We're excited to have people come and work with us. We want to have, this, to share the experience. And apart from the fact that the site itself is so special and, we're digging this wonderful temple complex, I always say archaeology and expeditions are, the playground for adults. It's like an adult summer camp, if you will. So it's a lot of fun. And we do take volunteers. We will, in fact, open registration in the beginning of December of 21. And our season will be in September of 2022. And the way to keep in touch with us and to know what's going on and to register is through our website, which is telmoza.org. So it's TLMOZA.org. And we have all the information there. And once registration opens, then anyone can register, and you can email us through there and just if you have any questions. So yeah, of course.
And of course, we will link to the Tel Moza website on Bible and Archaeology, so that there'll be a link. If they'll come to our website, we'll push them straight through to yours, so that people can find out more information. And if they want to participate in this fascinating excavation, they can come and be part of these new discoveries. And of course, people of all ages can come and join, right? There's a job for everybody on the dig site.
Yeah, we say 18 and up. So there is no end. And we've had, this last season, I think most of our volunteers were in their 60s or early 70s.
Really?
And there are different things to do. Yeah. So, there's always something to do. And if some people find it harder to be digging, then they can be sifting. And there's so many different things that you can be doing on an excavation and be part of it and contribute and feel like you're getting so much out of it. So definitely.
And on the weekends, do people get to travel?
We put together a plan. I have to say we stay in the best place, which is at the Notre Dame. It's a Sister of Zion convent in Ein Kerem, which is in the western outskirts of Jerusalem. It's a fantastic place. It's a complex, and we're hoping to have it all to ourselves. It depends on the amount of people we have. And we have an international group, so it's also fantastic. We have faculty and students and volunteers, so all ages from Europe, from the States, different, and of course, Israel. And what we do is we put together a program, and we have almost every day, we have either a lecture or a tour, a guided tour of archaeological sites or something that is, that has to do with the local culture. And then on the weekends is when we let people rest on Saturday, on the Sabbath. But we have noticed that our groups tend to then just do their own guided tours. So I think people need to rest every now and then, but it's really, full blown. And of course, all meals are taken care of and transportation. So you pay for this, but it is all inclusive. So.
Wonderful. So if people want to take a tour to Israel and get back into the swing of things, and they want to be a part of a fascinating excavation and see Jerusalem and see some of the sites, they can be part of this excavation and participate, 18 and up, any age. Shua Kisilevitz, thank you so much for taking the time to explain this fascinating site. Good luck on publishing all of this. I cannot wait to see what comes out of Tel Moza next year. I just can't wait to see what happens.
You and me both. It's a fantastic opportunity. I'm hoping to see a lot of people who are maybe watching this to see them come and visit the site or participate in the dig. And I can't wait to in a year from now to be sitting down and telling you about new discoveries we have. So thank you very much for having me.
Happy to have you, and I'll be over there in the spring, and can't wait to see it myself. Thank you again for being with us, and I wish you everything the best.